Why would she betray me like this? How could she betray our family? These were my initial thoughts when I woke up the next morning in a hungover haze. I am Jonathan Fremont, and until last night I believed my wife, Susan Fremont, was a devoted spouse and my true love. As it turns out, she is indeed a loving wife, but only in practice, with her lover, not with me. She revealed that she has been cheating on me for about a year and expects me to accept it. Absolutely not. I struggled to control my anger and revisited her words from the previous night. She claimed to love both him and me, yet she insisted on spending more nights with him, leaving me with no say in the matter. She explained that he is a divorce lawyer and she was merely assisting him. That was nonsense. She confessed that he was her divorce lawyer if I didn't comply with her wishes. Oh, hell! Having seen enough courtroom dramas on TV, I knew this was a significant conflict of interest that could lead to his disbarment. I smirked. However, my smile vanished as quickly as it appeared. I still didn't know the identity of this guy, and extracting information from Susan seemed impossible without resorting to extreme measures. I briefly contemplated taking drastic action against the unfaithful doxy, but then I thought about my children. She is their mother, and I couldn't subject her to that. When reconsideration, I went over the situation again. If I didn't play by her rules, I would end up paying for her and her lover's life at my expense. I remembered a friend who had gone through a divorce and shared his strategy at the bar one night. He emptied his accounts, leaving his cheating wife with nothing to hire a lawyer. Although she secured pro bono representation, she ultimately lost to my cunning friend. However, the key difference was that he didn't have kids, whereas I do. This meant I might have to pay child support at the very least. As far as I knew, she wasn't bringing him to our house, indicating that she was likely going to his place. Curious, I called my in-laws and had a conversation with my mother-in-law, who greeted me warmly, unaware of her daughter's unfaithfulness. I casually inquired about their usual babysitting routine, to which she informed me that they usually took care of the kids 3 or 4 times a week, from 8 to 5, while Susan volunteered at the homeless shelter and food bank. Learning that Susan was deceiving even her own parents saddened me. I expressed my gratitude and mentioned that I wanted to surprise Susan next week, asking my mother-in-law not to reveal my plan. She fell for my feigned cheerfulness and assured me she wouldn't say a word. I thanked her and ended the call, saying goodbye and wishing her a great day. I examined myself in the mirror. My hair wasn't thinning as much as I feared. I shaved, combed my hair, and indeed had more hair than Detective Stabler on SVU. Now the beer gut had to go. Despite Susan's hurtful comments the night before, she was right about that. How did I let myself go like this? All that overtime, working 160 hours a week to provide for my wonderful kids and my unfaithful wife. I loved my kids. My feelings for my wife were not as strong as she wanted me to believe. First things first, I initiated the cancellation of all our joint credit cards and ordered replacements in my name exclusively. Following that, I contacted my branch manager, directing him to transfer everything from our shared savings and checking accounts into a checking account solely under my name. Automatic bill payments were also terminated. This is self-defense, ladies and gentlemen. My wife's contempt and disrespect were evident as she deceitfully portrayed me as defenseless in our impending divorce. She declared war, and it was her mistake. However, her lawyer advisor guided her on what to say. Lawyers and cops share tactics, strong-arming and intimidation, to dissuade ordinary individuals from resisting. Cops resort to it when facing a valid complaint, while lawyers employ it for out-of-court settlements. They both underestimated me. Despite being just a diesel mechanic, I'm not foolish. Having spent 4 years in Army CID, I could have pursued a career as a cop or a private investigator, yet my passion lay in working on engines, specializing in diesel engines, even as a shade tree mechanic. Now a certified diesel mechanic, I earned decent money with substantial overtime at time and a half. Dressed in sweats, I jogged to clear my mind and, admittedly, to shed some of this beer gut post-jog, I called my boss, informing him of my need to take a couple of weeks of vacation time to navigate a family crisis. He granted approval, and then it was time to fine-tune my plan. Violence was inevitable, and there would be bloodshed. I knew that much from the start. There was a chance of ending up in jail, and I aimed to avoid that. With CID experience, I knew some tricks, but it would still be tricky. Shopping was next. After showering and changing, I ventured into town. Anticipating winter, I acquired soft gloves, a black turtleneck, and a ski mask without a mouth hole. Oakley shades with a matte gray finish, and matte black frames completed the ensemble. Walmart was a convenient stop. Yes, I was going to have a lot of fun once I identified the culprit. Then I visited our local ISP shop, obtaining voice-activated recorders and a GPS system with extended life batteries. Cameras could wait. A gym bag for new clothes and matty black steel-toed work boots were also on the list. Not a stretch, considering my old work boots were worn out. That was fine, though. The new boots would replace the old ones. A sporting goods store provided an aluminum baseball bat and a large gym bag. Deciding to purchase a sport girdle for my gut, just in case, I didn't want to be identified by my gut. That was for sure. I ensured I paid cash for everything, avoiding a paper trail from a credit card traceable back to me. Someone came the hard part, playing the submissive husband when my cheating wife got home, whenever she decided to get home, that is. I wouldn't capitulate right away. Susan knows me, and she knows how bullheaded I am. I stayed out all day until what would have been quitting time, not wanting the witch to suspect anything yet. Entering the house, she wasn't home. Well, screw it. I tried her cell phone, but it was off, going straight to voicemail. Urgent, I left her a message, specifying the time and date, insisting she called me ASAP, time to mess with her head a little bit. 2 hours later, she called, and the kids were still at their grandparents' place. She sounded out of breath, expressing concern about the situation. In response, I opted to sound a bit broken up and urged her to come home immediately, emphasizing that it was about the kids. I sobbed for effect and then hung up. Susan rushed home and arrived in less than 10 minutes after my call, entering the room from the garage. Observing my pale appearance, she anxiously inquired about what was happening, expressing fear for the children. In a harsh tone, I snapped, questioning her concern and accusing her of being too preoccupied with her lover to worry about the well-being of our children. My voice dripped with venom, and my eyes reflected intense hatred. I revealed that the marriage was over, but before concluding it all, I wanted to mess with her head. I highlighted the 2 hours during which her phone was off after I had called her upon returning from work. I questioned her priorities, asking if her lover was more important to her than our own children. Overwhelmed with emotion, Susan collapsed on the living room couch, sobbing pitifully. I questioned in a lower tone, pondering the hypothetical scenario of me being in the place of the children. I wondered aloud if she would care as much, or simply call her parents to extend the kids' stay, allowing her more time with her boy toy. Despite her red, tear-stained eyes, Susan looked up at me defiantly and insisted that it wasn't like that, sobbing in the process. Expressing disbelief, I accused her of using our children as weapons against me. Slowly shaking my head, I clarified that my intention was not to do that, but rather to make her realize the potential consequences of her actions. I questioned how she would explain being 2 hours late for something important, and how we could keep such incidents a secret when her phone was off. I also highlighted the possibility of emergencies with her parents and the kids trying to reach her. Unable to fathom her actions, I maintained a low, even tone, stating that she had done this to herself by getting involved with her boyfriend. I expressed missing my wife and emphasized that the kids missed their mommy. Despite her parents' love, they loved her more, causing her to pale. Deep down, she knew I was right, but her stubborn pride prevented her from admitting it. In response to my observations, Susan shrieked, her face reddened with rage and a hint of guilt. Guilt seemed to be the main source of her fury. I calmly stated that if she attempted to divorce me, she would leave me ruined and broken, as she sneered at me and declared her intent to go back after showering. As she headed back toward our bedroom, I thought, there is a God. In the master bath, I acted swiftly, grabbing the GPS and a voice-activated recorder before heading to her car. I concealed the voice-activated recorder under her seat and the GPS under the passenger seat. With receivers for both on me, I could track her movements and hear her conversations. The signal range was 10 miles. I was not sure I wouldn't lose it unless she went to the other side of town. Dipfucker's reckoning was imminent. After planning the devices and testing the receivers, I pocketed the voice receiver and placed the GPS receiver in my Ford F-250 diesel. Seated inside the truck with my head in my hands, I observed Susan emerging, dressed to impress, Pleading with her, I expressed my desperation, asking her not to go through with it and not to damage our family. Her expression softened as she conveyed her apologies, stating that she truly loved me, but emphasizing that the other man needed her. In response, I confronted her, pointing out that if she were genuinely sorry, she wouldn't proceed with the affair. I made it clear that she was betraying her role as a faithful wife by being involved with another man. Despite my straightforward approach, she insisted that she had to do it because he needed her. Following the importance of family, I reminded Susan that our family needed her presence. I questioned her commitment to me and our children, emphasizing that our 3 kids were the product of our love for each other. I pleaded with her to remember our shared history and the family we had built together. However, she reiterated her commitment to the other man, assuring me that she would be fully present for me and the kids tomorrow. Despite my reservations, I reluctantly agreed, expressing my disapproval with a shake of my head and a sigh of defeat. Her face initially displayed triumph, but it quickly transformed into a condescending smile. She assured me not to worry, expressing her love and stating that she would always be mine. I acknowledged her words, mentioning that it would take a long time for me to be okay with her decision. Shaking my head once again, I watched as she walked towards the garage, acknowledging to myself that she was correct. It was just a temporary situation. I was worried until Loverboy has been dealt with. Then let her see how much she likes him when I'm done. As soon as she left, I went and grabbed the aluminum baseball bat, my old Bowie knife, and my blowtorch. I grinned evilly as I climbed into the cab of my Ford and turned on the GPS and VAR receivers. She had the radio on, and I could hear her humming a happy tune along with the radio. I slipped the torch, knife, and bat into the gym bag as I gave her a 5-minute head start. I saw by the GPS that she was only a few miles away, so I gunned my truck to life and headed over there. I pulled up to the house where she had just parked her car in his garage. Crap. She even had a garage door opener for his place. Jesus, she might as well be married to him instead of me. I felt my rage rising again, but took some deep breaths to keep it in check. I wanted to do nothing more than to bust him there and smack the crap out of him and her too if she got in the way. At least I got his license plate number and jotted it down quickly. I always carry a pen and a small notebook with me as an old habit from my time in Army CID. I also jotted down his address. No, this would take some proper planning. I made sure that my gear was squared away. I got in the back of the cab and changed into my redneck ninja gear. As I came to think of it, I put on the girdle so my gut wasn't showing, pulled on the gloves to get rid of any fingerprints, and the sweater over that. I put on the black jeans and pulled the ski mask on over my face. This would just be recon tonight. Tomorrow would be a different matter, however. I then pulled around to the mouth of the alleyway behind the houses. I stopped a few houses down from Loverboy's and slipped out quietly. I left the bat inside the cab and went in silently through his alley gate. No problem so far. I kept my eyes open, scanning for any alarm systems, none so far. I went low and roadie-randed the closest window. There was light from inside and it was damn near pitch black outside. That would give me an advantage too. I stopped just below the window and peeked over the sill. What I saw made my blood boil. The guy was sitting there stroking himself while my wife gave him a little strip tease. I was now damn glad that I hadn't brought the bat with me, as I would have busted in the window and then busted his head open with my impression of Mark McGuire. Being several deep breaths to calm myself, I listened intently for any clues regarding the identity of the person she was interacting with. The voice on the other end spoke provocatively, expressing appreciation for Susan's dance and using suggestive language. Despite the urge to confront the situation immediately, I resisted and focused on maintaining self-control. There was a temptation to retrieve my bag from the truck, but I decided against it. The voice continued, praising Susan and expressing enthusiasm without any apparent guilt or hesitation. Knowing she was being deceptive, Susan giggled and mentioned someone named Jim. In response, the other person warned Jim that he would soon regret knowing Susan Fremont. Realizing that I had heard enough, I chose to leave before acting impulsively. I didn't want Susan present when I confronted the person on the other end of the conversation. While I had no intention of physically damaging Susan, her boy toy seemed to be a different matter, and I considered him fair game for a confrontation. So he had set out to seduce my wife, knowing she was married. He had willfully and knowingly cucked me. He had somehow subverted Susan's iron will. He was dangerous, and I was going to make damn sure he never did it to anyone else's wife. Since I was back in the cab, I got out of the sweater, black jeans, and ski mask with Ocals in the surprisingly comfortable sports girdle. It made my beer gut disappear when I put on my normal blue jeans, t-shirt, and boots. I started my truck and hauled out of there. Jim? Okay. Now I had a first name and I could look up his last name in the morning. I walked into my house and decided to get my lockpicks from my nightstand. I had kept them since my time in CID, and somehow I knew they would come in handy someday. I called my mom and asked if she would like for the kids to stay overnight, and she said sure, she missed her grandkids, so I promised to bring them by in the morning for her to watch. I then called Susan's folks to let them know that I would pick up the kids later in the morning, and while they loved their grandchildren, they were relieved that I would be picking them up and taking them to my mom's place. I packed a suitcase with some of my clothes and boxers and shoved it in my closet. It was getting close to the end game now. She was going to realize just how much she had lost within the next 72 hours. I got to bed early and awoke early the next morning, after another morning jog and an actually healthy breakfast. Today, I got on my old laptop and looked up Jim's address and license plate number. Mr. James Robert Stevens was his name. He was indeed a divorce attorney, and he also really had lost his wife in an accident several years back, so they weren't lying about that. He had, however, used it to seduce my wife. The dirtbag was using his personal tragedy to steal another man's wife, my wife. Typical a hole. The news of his loss actually made me feel even better for what I had planned for his holiness. He was going to know true pain, not the pain of loss that he had suffered before, but the pain that comes with the consequences of stealing another man's wife. I went to work as usual, still on my sabbatical, and parked in the parking lot. I then jogged to the bank and picked up my new ATM card and credit cards. Once those were in hand, I pulled $300 out of the ATM and rented a car from the Hertz rental place down the street from the bank. The car I rented was a nondescript sedan, and with my gym bag transferred from the truck to the car, I parked down the street from Leverboy's house. I used myself to call Susan, and surprisingly, she picked up after the first ring. I mentioned being on a short break at work and inquired about how long she intended to let the kids stay at her parents' house until Monday. She asked why, and I suggested that my mom could watch them for a while, as they were her grandkids too, and she missed them. I delivered the statement in a reasonable tone, concealing my growing resentment. Susan agreed nonchalantly, and I lied again, saying that my mom would pick them up shortly. In a hopeful tone, I asked if I could expect some affection at home when I finished work. There was a long silence before Susan muted her microphone and reluctantly agreed, stating that it was only fair, as she had promised to be all mine that night. Her quick compliance surprised and worried me. I continued the charade, claiming that I was leaning toward her perspective, but emphasizing my desire for equal time with her. Even expressed happiness, believing I was thinking clearly. I played along, insisting that we needed to talk when she got home, but proposing a special weekend plan. She happily agreed, unaware of my true intentions. As the conversation took a lighter turn, I instructed her to be showered and prepared for my arrival, mentioning my early departure from work. Despite the convincing tone, I felt a sense of disgust at my own performance. However, recent days of jogging, healthy eating, and abstinence from drinks had improved my stamina, making me more confident about the evening. I joked about going down on her, and she laughed, assuring me that she always showered and douched after being with the other man, a claim I knew was likely untrue. She assured me that she would be showered and ready for me, expressing her intention to see me tonight. After ending the call, I placed my cell phone back in my pocket. I swiftly changed in the back seat of the sedan, becoming the redneck ninja once again, although without my ski mask and shades. I slumped down in the car and waited, parked in the opposite direction, anticipating Susan's return home. Despite her lack of awareness, I couldn't afford to be careless. Susan might not be foolish in that regard, but she was certainly mistaken if she thought I would simply accept her deceit. Starting the car, I pulled into the driveway of an abandoned house a few doors down and across the street from Jim's place. Adjusting the mirror to keep an eye on his driveway and garage, I settled back into the seat, ready to wait for hours if necessary. Susan surprised me when she left after only a few hours. She texted me and said she was leaving now and would be home clean and fresh and waiting for me. I smiled grimly, then backed out of the driveway and followed her at a safe distance. I wanted to make damn sure she wasn't lying to me. After enough, she pulled into our driveway 10 minutes later, and I just drove on by and back to his place. I parked in the alley behind the houses again and slipped in through his back gate as I had done the previous night. Only this time I had my bat on me, and it was going to get a workout. I made sure my ski mask and shades were on and decided that it was indeed time. I looked in his bedroom window and the lover boy was asleep. I smiled grimly, then tried the back door. It was unlocked, so I didn't even need to pick the lock. What an arrogant a-hole. Fine by me. Now, some of my preferred movies include the Dark Knight trilogy, featuring Christian Bale, Michael Caine, and a bunch of other talented actors. One aspect I particularly enjoyed was how Bale altered his voice as Batman. I had the full redneck ninja persona going on, and upon entering his bedroom, he was still fast asleep, likely from a night spent with my wife. Well, that was about to change. Dropping the gym bag, I retrieved the bat, cleared my throat loudly, and he groggily opened his eyes. Spotting the bat, panic set in. I aimed for his knee, shattering his kneecap, severely limiting his mobility. He screamed, and I struck again, breaking his other kneecap, rendering him immobile. Smirking beneath my mask, I lowered my voice to a growl. I confronted the man, taunting him about his involvement with Susan and revealing that Jonathan was a friend who had warned me not to damage him. Expressing my own sense of justice, I swung at his groin, hearing bones crack as his pelvis broke. He pleaded for his life, offering money and crying in pain. Dismissing his pleas, I growled that I didn't want his money, but demanded that he never think about Susan Fremont again. I warned of dire consequences if he failed to comply, emphasizing that the encounter was merely a warning. I made it clear that reporting the incident to the police and causing consequences for Jonathan would result in my return with more severe consequences. I punctuated this with another swift swing to his groin. From what I observed the night before, he wasn't as well endowed as I was. He was in shape, though, a shape I would soon be in, but by then he wouldn't be able to compete. I swung the bat again, breaking his left arm just below the shoulder. I found his cell phone and smashed it along with both of his landline telephones. I didn't want him calling Susan or anyone else. Exiting through the back, I slipped out the gate and into the sedan. Changing again, I drove to a convenience store across town where I disposed of the bat. After filling the gas tank in the sedan's trunk, I drove out of town and set the remaining gym bag on fire. Once done, I wiped my fingerprints from the torch and tossed it into the flames. Having the Oakley shades was regrettable given their cost, but it was a necessary sacrifice. Next, I consulted a divorce attorney and had papers drawn up against Susan. I sought full custody of the kids and 75% of our assets. Alimony would not be paid, and I wouldn't request child support if she cooperated. I decided not to disclose the real reason for our divorce to her family. I informed my attorney that evidence of her affair would be recorded soon. Having the rental car, I thanked the provider, then jogged back to the diesel shop. I informed my boss that I could finish the remaining shift, but needed to leave early for a meeting with Susan. A few days off were still required, and he approved. After completing my work in the shop, I bought a prepaid cell phone on the way home. Activating it, I called emergency in my altered voice, reporting the incident involving Mr. James Robert Stevens and providing his address. I discarded the phone into a nearby canal. My intent wasn't to cut down him, but to make him feel the pain I endured. For the rest of his life, every time he had lovemaking with my wife, he'd remember the misery he caused, and that to me was a fair trade. I extracted the voice recorder from my pocket and activated it. It's essential to note that I don't endorse or accept my wife's affair, neither now nor in the future. After deactivating the recorder, I stowed it back in my pocket. Upon pulling into the garage, I retrieved the GPS and voice-activated recorders from Susan's car before heading inside. Tossing them in my truck, I left it at that. Upon reactivating my pocket recorder, I approached Susan from behind, encircling her waist with my arms. I commented on the enticing aroma of the food Susan was cooking, planting a kiss on the side of her neck. She was preparing steaks on the stove and had already made mashed potatoes and green beans. Susan expressed relief that I seemed more understanding, cueing as she turned for a kiss. Shifting the conversation, I casually inquired if she would have genuinely divorced me if I hadn't complied with her demands. I maintained a light tone as though her threats didn't bother me. She admitted that she would have divorced me without hesitation if I had denied her the relationship with her lover. Expressing regret, she insisted that she loved me. I further questioned her, asking if she would have taken my kids and denied me access, suggesting that such actions seemed harsh. Again, I kept my tone light, as if now accepting her demands. Susan acknowledged that she would have taken such measures, revealing that her lover had advised her to make the divorce as painful as possible. Having remorse, she mentioned having me for the weekend, with her mother caring for the kids until Monday. She proposed taking Monday off for our time together, but revealed plans to meet her lover again on Tuesday night until Wednesday morning, promising to be back to take care of our children. I sarcastically remarked on her being a great mother. In a defeated tone, I asked if there was nothing I could do to make her stop seeing him. She sighed condescendingly, apologizing and stating that she had to see the situation through. Despite the implications for her fitness as a mother, I acknowledged tonight as mine, planning to serve her with divorce papers on Monday. My lawyer assured me that the papers would be ready, and I intended to make the call on Monday morning. Dinner was fantastic, and I'd miss her cooking. Afterward, I showered and took her in my arms. I made love to her that night, passionately and vigorously, something we hadn't done in a long time. She climaxed repeatedly thanks to my improved stamina and sobriety. I satisfied her thoroughly, but it didn't end there. I marked her, leaving several hikes on her chest, neck, stomach, and inner thighs. I was reclaiming her, and she reveled in every moment of it. After finishing, Susan discovered the marks when she went to the bathroom. Shocked and screaming, she returned to the bedroom, expressing concern about how she could face her lover now. I casually shrugged off her distress, asserting that as my wife, I wanted her marked as mine, regardless of his preferences. I reminded her that she never explicitly told me not to mark her and pointed out that she seemed to enjoy it during the act. My response silenced her and she softened, sitting on the bed and taking my hand. She expressed that the encounter was the best they've ever had, even better than with her lover. I sensed the authenticity of her pleasure, realizing that my efforts to make the experience enjoyable for her had paid off. In a plea for her to stop seeing her lover, I conveyed my love and desire to spend the rest of my life with her. Despite concealing my emotions well, the truth was that the encounter had been fueled by anger and hatred instead of tenderness and love. Regardless, I played my part convincingly. Susan assured me that she was still my wife, expressing love and claiming that the affair would run its course in a few more months. She seemed genuinely happy and prepared for the possibility of divorce, but I planned to blindside her. The next day, she reverted to her old self, cooking, cleaning, and initiating lovemaking. That night, I informed her of taking Saturday and Monday off to spend more time together, enjoying our time while keeping a guard against her facade. Renewing the marks I made on her Friday night, she didn't protest afterward. It wasn't until Monday that everything unraveled. I pleaded with her one last time not to go back to him. Instead, she grabbed her cell phone and headed to the living room. I informed her that I was picking up the kids, and she agreed. I collected my boy and 2 girls from Mom's house, and she thanked me for letting them stay with her. On the way home, we stopped at Burger King, and I treated them to lunch. They loved it. Sure, it's not McDonald's, but, oh well, the food tastes a lot better than Mickey D's. As we were leaving, Susan's ringtone echoed from my cell phone. I playfully chuckled into the phone, asking if she missed me already. I explained that I had taken the kids to Burger King for lunch and we were on our way home. Susan screamed, demanding an explanation. I casually mentioned that she had been served with divorce papers while I was picking up the kids, adding that she must have received the papers. Apologizing and suggesting we talk about it at home, I ended the call before she could retort and turned off my phone. Pulling into the garage, I took the kids inside. Despite the divorce papers, Susan was genuinely happy to see them, and they eagerly ran to her, asking where she had been. She made up a usual lie about volunteering, and then truthfully explained that we had a special mommy and daddy-only weekend planned. Instructing the kids to play in their rooms, I told Susan that we needed to talk and took her into the basement. Following the kids wouldn't hear us, I informed Susan that I had decided to divorce her, expressing my inability to endure the situation any longer. I reminded her of my repeated requests to end the affair and revealed that I had her own admission of the affair on tape. I declared my intention to send the tape to my attorney, who would submit it as evidence in the divorce proceedings. The divorce papers indicated my pursuit of full custody, highlighting her neglect of the family and her admission that her lover was more important than the children would be presented at the trial. I hinted that her lover acting as her attorney could lead to his disbarment, as it was considered a severe breach of ethics for a lawyer to be involved romantically with their clients, especially in divorce cases, according to my own attorney's advice. She stood there in shock, her mouth hanging open as she wrestled with finding words. I explained that I now realized I never truly knew her, just as she never knew me. Over the years, I had done everything to make her happy, buying the house, her car, and much of her jewelry. Despite spending more than we could afford, I compensated with overtime to improve her life and that of our kids. I expressed regret for not balancing it with the affection and love she deserved. I admitted genuinely loving her, but her affair had terminated that love. According to her belief, I clarified that I never said I was okay with it. I revealed that I had given her one final chance that morning to end the affair completely, begging her to do so. If she had complied, I wouldn't have served her with divorce papers. Instead, she called her lover before I picked up the kids. Apologizing for the situation, I shook my head ruefully, though I was lying through my teeth. I didn't want her to know that I had been plotting this all along. In the divorce decree, I offered her generous visitation with the kids, either under my supervision or Mom's or Grandpa's. The next part would be difficult, but I had to inform Mom and Grandpa of the impending divorce. I called Mom first, explaining the entire situation and that I had recorded Susan's admission of the affair. Mom agreed to babysit while I worked each day. I gathered the children, explained that Mommy and I wouldn't live together, but would always be there for them. They were happy about moving in with Grandma. Mom had rooms since Dad died, and we'd stay there. We packed up quickly, and I informed Susan that she was welcome at my mom's house with us if she didn't bring her boyfriend. She appeared utterly defeated. 2 days later, she discovered that Jim was in the hospital. When she called, I was back at work, asking her what was up. Susan, enraged, accused me of nearly assassinating him, to which I responded with confusion and denial, playing my part convincingly. She insisted that I knew who she was talking about and claimed that Jim was never going to be the same again. She was crying as she accused me of trying to cut down him. I maintained my confusion, asking her who Jim was and expressing incredulity at her statements. I brought up a colleague and drinking buddy named Jim Barnes, who was present and overheard my side of the conversation. Jim Barnes was aware of the situation, and he tried not to laugh. Susan realized she couldn't prove my involvement, and that I wasn't going to admit it. I calmly asked if some guy named Jim was her boyfriend, stating that if he was almost dead, it couldn't be Jim Barnes, who was likely to be terminated by a heart attack. I grinned at Jim Barnes, who couldn't contain his laughter, and ran into the office. Susan admitted that Jim had claimed he was attacked, but didn't know who did it. She mentioned that he had his balls crushed. I expressed my lack of sympathy if he was the man who stole her from me. I disassociated myself from the incident, but jokingly added that I'd buy a beer for whoever did it. Seizing the opportunity, I planted seeds of doubt, suggesting that he might seduce someone else's wife. I reminded her that she couldn't be with him all the time. Susan began to doubt his intentions, and I smiled, asking why she thought he wouldn't do such a thing. I pointed out that she had mentioned he used his wife's pass-away to seduce her. Susan stopped and contemplated, eventually realizing that I was right. In a surprising turn of events, she admitted that I was right, breaking her pattern of never acknowledging my correctness. "Susan, mark this day on the calendar for me, the day you actually admitted that I was right about something." I laughed. Yeah, she didn't like that. Despite her disapproval, she didn't contest the divorce. Mom testified to providing babysitting for my children while I worked, and the judge took everything into account, including the pattern of behavior over the past year that Susan had been having the affair with Jim Stevens. While she had left the kids with responsible adults, she had done so to carry on her affair and secret. The judge didn't quite declare her unfit, but put me as the primary custodian. He declared Susan as secondary, but only on the stipulation that she not bring her lovers around the children. I wasn't thrilled with that, but I was satisfied. Hell, before she took up with Jim, Susan was a great mother. Now she would have a chance to be a great mother again. Then the judge told me that I would only have to pay child support, and only for the time they spent with Susan. Susan was ordered to get a job in college. She had majored in accounting so she could get a job easily. The house was sold, and we split at 50-50 the Rathals. Our joint accounts, which I had absconded with at the beginning, however, were split 75-25 in my favor. Yes, Susan attempted to complain, but the judge sternly reminded her that she had nearly lost all custody of her children due to her own selfishness and instructed her to get a job. Interestingly, the same judge presided over my alienation of affection lawsuit against James Robert Stevens. He actually took it seriously, and based on Susan's confession and testimony, surprisingly on my behalf, I was awarded $500,000 in the settlement. Yeah, I liked that judge. When the final gavel clacked, marking our official divorce, and me $500,000 richer thanks to her efforts, I took Angie, my attorney, out for drinks at the Silver Spa. I had continued to exercise and eat right, and had cut out almost all drinks. But on this night, I wanted to at least have a beer or two. My ponycake beer go was back down to 6-pack apps. Yeah, I'd gotten back in shape during the whole mess. I knew I would have to be there for my kids, and I would be back on the market. I just hoped and prayed to find someone who wasn't as shallow and selfish as Susan. Angela Johnson is a gorgeous woman. Her dark chocolate skin looked delicious. It had been almost 7 months since I'd last had lovemaking with Susan, just before I blindsided her with the divorce papers. During that time, Angie and I had grown pretty close. We were more than just attorney-client. We'd become friends. As friends, we went to the bar for a couple of beers. Angie asked about my plans, and I shared that I intended to return to work and focus on raising my kids. I mentioned finding a smaller house with 1 story and 4 bedrooms, which was more affordable than the large one Susan had made me buy 3 years ago. She clinked bottles as I explained that I had moved in a couple of weeks ago, closed on the house, and the new location was closer to work, which the kids loved. Angie then asked about her own situation, acknowledging that she took on my case despite the potential losses. I thanked her for that, and she revealed that she had been divorced for about 4 years since her ex was caught cheating on her. I expressed surprise, and she explained that she doesn't like cheaters, which resonated with me. We shared a laugh and clinked bottles again. As our professional relationship concluded, Angie surprised me by asking if she could fire me as a client. Puzzled, I inquired about the reason, and she humorously mentioned that she doesn't date clients. I agreed, and she fired me with a smile, suggesting that we go to her place so she could cook for me. Fast forward 6 months, Angie and I have been dating, and it has been a joyful period. As a high-powered divorce attorney, Angie is not high maintenance, especially compared to Susan. She loves me and my kids, and we find it adorable that the children call her Mommy, too. Angie has moved in with us, and Susan joins us for dinner some nights when she takes the kids for the weekend. Angie and I share a fulfilling life together, enjoying each other's company and the pleasures of a great relationship. As for the idiot, he never recovered from what I did to him. He stepped penniless and alone after all his wife's insurance money went to paying his medical bills, court fees, and my alienation of affection lawsuit. Good. To hell with him. Susan seems to be doing much better now since her hormones were really out of whack. At least according to her doctor, she's been taking supplements and seems to be on much more of an even keel now. She has a steady job at an accounting firm in our town and is making some decent money. I've been promoted to supervisor of the diesel shop and make as much now for 40 hours as I used to for 60. I now have plenty of time to spend with my kids and with a new woman in my life. Susan will have to live with the crap she's done, and that's good enough for me. She blames herself for everything now, and I'm not even going to try to console her. She doesn't even date since she says she's still in love with me. Bull crap. But whatever. She'll have those regrets for the rest of her life, and part of me hopes she chokes on them. Am I still a little bitter? Yeah, I have to admit that I am. Luckily, Angie is here to help take my mind off the crap my ex put me through. Yeah, life is pretty damn good now.